Hello, my name is Misty Poe, and I'm the managing editor of the Times West Virginian. For the 2012 general election, the Times West Virginian asked the candidates for the 1st Congressional District seat to meet with the editorial board to answer identical questions. We are presenting their answers in one video package. It is our hope that our newspaper and digital readers make informed decisions as they head to the polls on November 6th to cast their vote for this race. We hope this video presentation is one more tool you can use to be the most informed voter possible. Thank you for watching. Our first question would be, what do you believe will be the most effective way to create and maintain jobs across the nation as well as in the 1st Congressional District?
As any employer, having spent 47 years in the private sector creating jobs, that is removing the uncertainty. The uncertainty is sweeping across this country. We don't know. You see what's going to happen tomorrow. Are taxes going to go up? Is there going to be a new regulation? What's the effect of the Obamacare? We just don't know. So as a result, employers all across America are just holding back. They don't have confidence that this is all going to be resolved. They want to know, with all this issue, is there going to be tax reform? Are the taxes going to go up on certain individuals? Because that's being promoted, as you know, in Congress, on both sides. So people are looking at different aspects of tax reform. But we have to make sure we understand that if you start going after one group, picking winners and losers, there's a chance that people are going to be in those S corporations, those small businesses are going to be affected with that. So they're going to be paying a higher tax. And they're saying, as a result, I think what's happening all across America, everyone's just holding back. I talked to businesses after business, and they're all saying they're just not hiring until they understand where we're going as a nation, what's going to happen. So that uncertainty is just huge with it, and coupled with that is the amount of restoring confidence in America, the American business community. Do they feel like that it's a time to reinvest, to hire more people? We listened to a debate last night. They were talking about a tax structure on equipment. They were saying, Andy, that if the business comes in, if they buy that piece of equipment, the taxes on it the equivalent of 2 additional employees. They're saying, why are we putting a tax on that when we could be hiring more people to work? So there's a lot of just the uncertainties. Restoring confidence and eliminating the uncertainty. The regulatory, getting the EPA back off our backs. I think people would just simply say, if they knew tomorrow that the EPA could not pass a new regulation, that it seems like it's going to be every month we get a new regulation coming out of them, they don't know what to do. Are we going to have another restriction on our coal mining operations? Are we going to have another restriction on our electric generation? Are we going to have a restriction on greenhouse gas emissions? All these changes just cause uncertainty. So that's why one of the pieces of legislation we've talked about was called the REIN Act, R-E-I-N. And all that said was, let's just stop all these new regulations for 18 months, and let's take another look.
I think it's important that we do immediate steps to get people back to work. And I'll tell you, my family's story is a story of many West Virginians. My grandfather and great-grandfather worked for the Works Progress Administration in Wheeling during the Depression. My family survived the Depression because the government created jobs for people. And they weren't handouts. They built roads and bridges and dams and other public facilities that are still in use today. And I think the federal government needs to do something very similar now. We need to get people back to work immediately. And as you look around West Virginia and throughout the country, you see roads and bridges that are crumbling. We see water lines that are being destroyed. We see all kinds of infrastructure projects that could be done. Not only could that create construction jobs for people, but if we required as much as possible to use American-made products in those projects, we could also revitalize our manufacturing sector. It would be very important to require as much as possible American-made steel to be used in those projects. And I think that is the immediate steps that we need to make in order to get people back to work and back into the middle class.
Where do you stand on the Bush-era tax breaks? Should they be extended for all, only those making under $250,000 per year, or eliminated altogether?
Earlier this morning, I saw that Senator Durbin from Illinois just came out with the position that many of us have been saying in the House, and that was just extend all of them for 6 months. Maybe it should be a year, but I accept it's a compromise, and that's what the art of in politics often is compromise on this. And I think that we need to extend all of them. Go back to even within the last year, where the president said you don't raise taxes on people during a recession. Now maybe in the technically we're not in a recession anymore. But tell that to the 23 million people that are out of work or underemployed. They're still hurting. So the idea of putting another tax on, or another issue, as we were referred to earlier, about these businesses, often businesses will fit into that 250,000 classification. So we're going to put another tax on them selectively. What's interesting is that we had this report that was given to us by Ernst & Young. It came out. It wasn't sponsored by. It was sponsored by the Independent Community Bankers of America, and they said if you do this selective tax, if you just raise the tax on people and corporations that make over $250,000 a year, you will jeopardize 700,000 jobs that are likely to be lost under that scenario, and you will affect 894,000 small businesses across America that could potentially be affected with this. So this isn't the time to be picking winners and losers. Even Bill Clinton followed up with that, said the same thing. You don't raise taxes during this period, the economic situation we're in. So what we're saying is, in the House, we passed this bill, was no tax increase, not during now. I agree with Durbin. If that means extending it for 6 months, let's take another look at it, because we all know our tax system in America is broken. We can't do it incrementally. We can't do it by piecemeal with this. We need time to be able to put together a more comprehensive package. We've done that in the House. We passed something that changed the tax structure to get, instead of 5 classifications, down to 2. We know what we need to do in that direction, but we don't want to do it in something just for politics. Let's divide and conquer. Let's have this class envy. This is not productive. This is what I think is what's causing people to lose confidence in both the political system and what's going on in Washington.
It is important that we keep the tax breaks for those making under $250,000, but I do believe that we need to eliminate the tax breaks for those making over $250,000. I think it is very important right now that we rebuild the middle class in this country. When this country has been its strongest has been when the middle class has done well. Middle class workers are the economic engine that fires up our economy and keeps it going. I often talk about Henry Ford, who wasn't always a good friend of workers, but who realized that if his employees didn't make enough money to buy cars, that they would no longer be able to have Ford Motor Company be successful. You know, he understood that he had to pay his workers twice what other employers were paying their workers in order to have them afford cars. And I think we need to do the same thing. If the tax breaks for the wealthiest 2% of Americans were effective at creating jobs, we would be drowning in jobs right now. I think it is very, very important that we target those towards middle class people and use them as a way to get more people into the middle class.
Considering that the United States government currently has a federal deficit in excess of $16 trillion, what measures do you support to immediately address this critical dilemma?
We've been working on that since day one. And we had compiled, we just updated it a couple of days ago, that we've already made my votes in the House have already cut would have cut if they had been adopted by the Senate. $5.5 trillion out of that 16 trillion. We've already made some of those reductions, and these are all recorded votes that we have, and I'll give that to you so that you have a copy of. Those are all the things we've already made. Some steps to try to make that reduction, because you're absolutely right. Our deficit at $16 trillion is being passed on to our children and grandchildren, and we're running at an annualized basis about $1.5 trillion to $1.4 trillion every year. We're adding to the deficit. I don't think people understand what a trillion is. You know, as an engineer or a businessman, I can relate to a billion, but not a trillion. So for your viewers or anyone, it's just to understand what $1 trillion looks like. If you stack $1,000 bills, just a series of $1,000 bills, and you stack them up, and when they get to be 4 inches high, that's $1 million. And $1 million is a lot of money and a lot of ways to spend. It's the question then for people to visualize, how high is $1 trillion? $1 trillion is 64 miles high. Stacked $1,000 bills, not end to end. That's mind-boggling for the American public to understand. And we've exceeded that this year, the year before that. For the last 4 years, we've added $5 trillion in debt. That's why it was imperative on all of us. We're trying to find ways of cutting back. And listen, you have to understand, even with the Affordable Health Care Act that was passed, it was passed with the idea it was only going to cost the American public about $800 billion. They've just come out and said it's $1.76 trillion, almost $900 billion more, almost twice what they were talking about. When you talk about that impact on the government and on the private sector, that's why we have to drastically look at making changes to the health care plan, because we can't afford it as a nation. So we've already laid out some plans. We need to stay with it.
As we look back over the last 10 years or so, that we find that the two greatest indicators and have contributed to the rise in the deficit have to do with the tax breaks that were done during the Bush era, and also the unfunded wars. We have been in 2 wars that were basically unfunded, and we have got to address those issues. As I said in my previous question, I think we do need to end the tax breaks for the wealthiest 2% of Americans. But we also need to end tax breaks for companies that are shipping jobs overseas. I have never understood why that was even reasonable to do. We're giving tax breaks to companies that are shipping our American jobs overseas. And that has been very, very devastating to our economy and to our workforce. The other thing I think we need to address is the fact that it seems that we are often going and fighting in other countries that have turned into war profiteering. You know, we now have a system in which there are no bid contracts that are going out to companies that basically, and I hear this from veterans, are participating in war profiteering. My son-in-law served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army, and he would talk about private contractors fighting next to him who were making anywhere from 8 to 10 times what American military members were making. You know, and that is going on while we have military families on military bases who are existing on food stamps. That is unacceptable. You know, we have got to figure out how are we going to determine where we need to send our sons and daughters to battle and make sure that they are not being sent somewhere simply so another corporation can make a profit at their expense. I'm very disturbed by the fact that they have recently reported that there are now more military members coming back and committing suicide than are being killed in battle. I think that is something that when then we hear talk of cutting veterans' benefits, that is totally unacceptable. We need to make sound decisions before we send our sons and daughters off to fight, and then we need to ensure that we will take care of them when they come home.
Do you think the healthcare overhaul legislation as it is today is sound, or are there aspects you would like to see eliminated, changed, or modified?
Absolutely, it needs to be modified. I don't know how it's so complicated that I would have to agree with many people that just say it's better to replace it, repeal it, but absolutely replace it. Now there are some components that we need to keep that are absolutely solid. Things like pre-existing conditions, that removing the cap for people with long-term health issues. Those need to be kept with it. The coverage for people up to 26 years of age, those are fine. Those will be put in a replacement piece of legislation. But in the meantime, what we're looking for is we want to be able to get insurance across state lines. We want more portability with that. We want more personal accountability of how you maintain your health. I want to see how people, when they actually run up against that one element, the independent or the advisory board, the IPAP, when people find out that there is now a governmental body that stands between you and your doctor for your health care, it's an unelected bureaucrat. There are 15 who are going to make decisions about what health care you're going to be able to achieve. And it's the cornerstone of how they're attempting to reduce costs through the Obamacare, is this IPAP. We have already voted to repeal that. The Senate hasn't taken that up. But we want to remove any barrier between you and your doctor. That's what this should be all about, is make sure that we maintain that, not put government in between. So that's one of the main one of the more important things with it. We also know that according to the Kaiser report and the National Federation of Independent Businesses are saying if we don't change it, our healthcare rates are going to go up. And that was contrary to what the whole concept was. It was supposed to reduce costs, but it's not. It was put together in a very partisan way, and unfortunately, what we have to do is go back and kind of restructure it, make sure that it's bipartisan, and come back out with a replacement. Because we're not going to go back to the old way. The American public does not want to have that. So we've got to have some of the changes within the healthcare that I've already suggested.
Overall, I think our health care plan that was initiated under the Affordable Care Act has brought wonderful benefits, both here in West Virginia and throughout the country. I appreciate the fact that my 24-year-old daughter could get back on her dad's insurance when she had a job that did not provide insurance. I think the fact that senior citizens are now seeing the donut hole closed. For those of you who don't know, that is a point in Medicare where senior citizens are required to pay 100% of their prescription drug prices. I have talked with senior citizens who talk about cutting their pills in half, taking them every other day, not turning on their heat in the winter because they have to be able to pay for their prescription drugs. The fact that the Affordable Care Act is reducing the donut hole and eventually will eliminate it, I think is wonderful. Another aspect of Medicare that has been helped by the Affordable Care Act is the fact that preventative care can now be done for senior citizens without having to make a co-payment or a deductible. That is wonderful and is helping senior citizens throughout West Virginia and throughout the country. I am also happy to see that they have provided a way for people with pre-existing conditions to be able to have affordable health care. You know, we have had many, thousands and thousands of people throughout West Virginia and millions throughout the country who simply could not get health care and buy affordable insurance because they had a pre-existing condition. We have many children who were born with some sort of a condition that the insurance companies are saying they won't cover because it's a pre-existing condition. We also have people who have been diagnosed with different conditions and are then told later that no, they are somehow lumped in with something else. I think it is very, very good. Now, I often hear people talk about the fact that they don't like the mandate. And I understand why people get concerned about that. But I believe that people with pre-existing conditions should be able to get affordable health care. I also don't believe that we ought to let people not have health insurance until they get really sick, and then decide to buy in to the health insurance, and then once they get better, they can get out of it. I think there's a personal responsibility, and if you believe, as I do, that people with pre-existing conditions should be able to purchase affordable health care and get the care they needed, then we have to make sure that people get in when they're healthy, not just when they're sick.